Welcome. My name is Professor Helen Payne, and I'm the founding editor-in-chief for the journal Body, Movement and Dance in Psychotherapy. This is an international peer-reviewed journal published by Taylor and Francis. Articles explore embodied relating in psychotherapy. It is the only scholarly journal wholly dedicated to the growing fields of body psychotherapy, somatic psychology, and dance movement psychotherapy. The importance of the role of the body and movement in manifesting expression, insight and change and in promoting recovery is increasingly being recognised in fields such as mental health, neuro and cognitive sciences and psychology. The journal encourages broad and in-depth discussion of issues relating to research activities, theory, clinical practice, professional development and personal reflections. This journal is essential reading for all body psychotherapists, somatic psychologists, dance movement psychotherapists and creative arts therapists. It also provides important material for all mental and physical health professionals, such as psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, counsellors, and other relevant health professionals. We are delighted to launch and fund the present series of interviews, showcasing international pioneers from the fields of body psychotherapy and dance movement psychotherapy. We are grateful for their time and their participation, and value their contribution to disseminating history, theory, research, and practice. Additional appreciations go to the interviewers, who also volunteered their time freely, and to the recording editors of the series, Jim O'Connell and Seb Syracuse. We hope you enjoy listening.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am honored to be sitting with Dr. Judyth Weaver, a teacher and counselor who, over a lifetime of practice, has incorporated extensive training and studies in dance, body, mind, spirit, integrative practices, Buddhism practices, and Taoism. She's a creator and founding chair of my alma mater, Santa Barbara Graduate Institute doctoral program in somatic psychology. She's also taught at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, as well as other institutes in the Bay Area. She's part of the founding faculty for Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, and she created their Tai Chi, and I might pronounce this wrong, I apologize, Chung program. She holds a doctorate in Reichian psychology. She's certified in Reichian therapy, somatic experiencing, massage, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, pre and perinatal therapy, and she's a teacher of the Tai Chi Chuan, as mentioned. She's also a senior teacher of the Rosen method and sensory awareness. As a modern dancer, Judyth studied classical dance in Japan in the 60s, where she spent several years learning Japanese culture. And she lived and studied at the Shofuchi traditional Rinzai Zen Buddhist monastery. You know, so I have to look at my notes to even say this. Under Yamada Muman Roshi. She has taught and led workshops at Esalen Institute in California, Hollyhock in Canada, as well as other Western states, and she's been to Russia and India and Taiwan and Mexico as a teacher. She currently maintains a private practice in somatic reclaiming, which is her process of a mind-body integration, and it's based on the belief that we're all born with everything we need. We're whole, we're ready to go. But with traumas and enculturation and teachings, things become confusing and they deter us. And she works to bring back support and awareness so we can reclaim our natural inclination to health and to self and to being. That's really our birthright. We met back in 2018 when she received the 2018 Lifetime Award from the United States Association of Body Psychotherapy. I was blessed to be able to interview her and write about her life. And one of the things we chit-chatted about was my experience at Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, because a funny thing happened on the way to that program. A little bit about me. I am a graduate of 3GI. We've said that. I'm my doctorate's in clinical psychology with a focus in somatic. I'm a teacher. I'm a writer. I'm an editor. I'm responsible for Somatic Psychotherapy Today, an online publication entering its 13th year, which is very exciting for me. And I bring together my work in narrative therapy, body psychotherapy, text, to bring the body and life together on the page. I primarily work now as a writer. So Judyth, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the SBGI and what went on there, because it was a very special place. And to think it almost didn't happen makes me feel a little sad.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for the introduction. But, we met even earlier.
Oh.
I remember meeting you at the European Association of Body Psychotherapy conference in Greece, and you had a table out there. And I remember talking to you. You have always been such a delight and such an up person about this field. So thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And the history of SBGI that very few people know is that Marty Glenn and Wendy McCarty and I all met in studying pre and perinatal psychology, actually studying with William Emerson and then the connections with Ray and everything. And I had been teaching at CIIS, totally 25 years, and was created a body-mind program, and then the somatic psychology program was there and big. And there, I always kept saying, well, this MA program is fine, but we need a PhD program for somatic psychology. And Don Johnson would always say, oh, that would be so much work. And he would never agree to do it. And so the three women, Wendy and Marty and I, and then Marty's husband, Ken, who was a great support for the whole thing, we decided to create a program, a PhD program in pre and perinatal psychology. And we sent the $5,000, what I think it was, fee to California. And they wrote back and they said, okay, go ahead. And we were all together doing this pre and perinatal psychology program. And then we noticed on the information that for that money, we were allowed to create 4 programs. And we were doing 1 program. And Marty Glenn looked at me and she said, Judyth, do you want to do a somatic psychology program? And I said, sure, PhD program, just what we need. And that's how it happened. We were not even going for it.
Well, I'm glad it transpired the way it did.
Yeah, so am I. Yeah. But it was just like a whoosh,
So what brought you into the field of psychology?
My tortured childhood, might I say. I had, so I had a very difficult childhood and growing up. And as soon as I was on my own, and actually in New York, 17 years old as a dancer, I spent all of my money on dance classes and on therapy because I really knew I needed help. I had read books and I was studying psychology at Hunter College, but the therapists I went to, and it was more than one at that time, nothing was happening. It just really, really, it just wasn't happening. And eventually I went on my way to Asia, even though I didn't make it there. 1960, I went to the West Coast to San Francisco. And again, the focus was dance and therapy. And I remember even telling one of the therapists, as I felt the therapy wasn't doing anything for me, that I think he was an intern. And I said, I think I failed you or you failed me. It's just not working. And, actually, eventually, to make a long story short, it was, I went to Asia, did just what you said. I spent a year and a half in a Zen Buddhist monastery, which was a very good therapy, you might say. It was a different kind of therapy, but certainly therapy. And when I come back and I married and in a few years, I ended up being a single mother.
Mm.
And then I really knew I needed help. And I didn't have much money. And I went to a clinic in the area where I lived, and I was assigned to one of the young interns there probably. And I remember my first session with this person. He said, Yes, I've been here for a while. I'm doing, family therapy, but I've been studying something new. And I'd like to do it with you. It has to do with the body. And I remember sitting there and thinking, body? This can't be bad. Okay. And so I didn't know what I was doing, but I agreed to doing it. And he had been studying Reiki and therapy, which was sort of on the West Coast, an outlaw form, because Reich never wanted his work to be named after him.
Right.
But everyone on the West Coast was calling it Reiki and therapy because nobody had studied orgonomy or had any connections with Reich or anything, and they were just teaching. And I worked with him, I don't remember how long, but I remember continuing because there was something. It was reasonable. It did include the body.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, as I parked my car and got out of the car and shut the door, going into the therapy session, I remember very clearly not thinking, but feeling, oh, I'm feeling different. Something has happened. Mm-hmm. And I went in and asked my therapist for books to read, for other things to do, and to connect with other people who were teaching Reiki and therapy. And that's how I got into it. I had read about Reich a bit. I had known about him, but to feel that something, and all those therapists where nothing happened, the sitting and talking, mm-hmm. something really, really did happen. And that's what got me there.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
And
yeah.
with that foundation in the Reich's studies, Reich's work, and then your combination with dance, with movement, it's you wove it in a way, in a very unique way. Was that just sort of an organic happening in your being that brought this together? Was it other people you met and changes that came? Having been fortunate to meet with other, movement people, we've got Al Peso and Stanley Kellerman and Christine Caldwell, all the different moving cycles and systems. And it seems as that there's something really potent and powerful about the foundational work from Reich and Lowen and others, but also the spirit and the soul and sort of our organic intelligence of our being. Can you think of a was there like an aha moment for you where sort of things came together? Was it sort of just a flow? How did this sort of creation of your process come?
For me, the aha moment was that person saying it had something to do with the body, and I jumped. And then and afterwards, I studied with most of those people that you mentioned and others. But beforehand, I remember my first interview with Yamada Mumon Roshi in the monastery, and he said, "Oh, so what did you do in the United States?" And I said, "I was a dancer." And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, "Now you will learn the highest form of dance, movementless dance." And I thought, oh, okay, maybe, I think. And I learned a lot about movement by sitting still and not moving.
Wow.
Yeah. That's one, movement is a very important way to learn, to express, to feel, because we're all moving creatures. But also the opposite, sort of like the yin and the yang, the opposite of the sitting in stillness. There's a lot of movement there. And what does that tell us?
Can you say more about the movement in stillness? I'm fascinated. I mean, my mind starts going to fluids and breath and cells and but can you flesh that out a little bit? I mean, I'm really fascinated.
I think you fleshed it out. Cells, movement, and breath, and breath is so incredibly important. And I must say that So I trained in Reiki and therapy, and there was that movement, and I studied with Kellerman and almost everybody who was teaching on the West Coast. And this is, after coming back from Japan and all of that stillness. But what also happened for me, and I was very, very lucky, in New York, before I ever went to Asia, I saw a class at the New School for Social Research where I studied some various things. The class was entitled Nonverbal Communication. And I thought, that's for me. The classes interfered with some of my dance classes. So I never took the class, but it was being given by Charlotte Selver and Charles Brooks. Nonverbal communication. I knew that was my field. So interestingly enough, after coming back from Japan, the two things that I took up to sort of anchor me back to the United States and this culture was Tai Chi Chuan, which I had always wanted to study and had never found the one that really felt best to me. And just coincidentally, down the road from the Zen Center where I was staying in San Francisco, there was a workshop being given almost that night by Charlotte Selver and Charles Brooks. And by this time, it was called Sensory Awareness. So I went, and it was like, boing, here I am. And that work has been so important to me. I wouldn't say the movement, the awareness of whatever. I mean, awareness is movement. Breath is movement. Everything is movement. How could we not be? And it was so important that, and so what unusual that here I had Tai Chi Chuan, which was a form, and here I had sensory awareness, which was formless. And there I was. These were the two most important practices for me. And probably without my even knowing it, the awareness of whatever, and I wouldn't call it movement, whatever somebody wants to be aware of, that's what I wanted to help them come to. Because most of us are taught out of awareness. We're taught how to do things, not how to be. I mean, even as little kids. And for me, bringing the awareness or allowing people to say, oh, I've got the time. I can take this breath. I can feel this breath. I can feel the movement that the breath is making. All of that was so important. I hadn't really realized that I incorporated sensory awareness into my Reiki and therapy, which definitely had a pattern. You might say the people that taught me, I would call it huffing and puffing, because it was not the sensitive ergonomic therapy that Wilhelm Reich was doing. But I didn't know, right? I had no idea. But bringing that together seemed to make a big difference to people. And my most important classes at CIIS were, we had 3 semesters of theories and psychology of Wilhelm Reich that I taught, and a class in sensory awareness that I felt everyone who is going to be a therapist or work with people needs to have. This is a required course. At least for the 25 years I was there, it was a required course. Now it isn't. And the interesting thing is, it was, separate, and I felt I brought them together, and that's where my name Somatic Reclaiming came. I don't teach anyone, except in Tai Chi I do, movements that they've never done before. But in this therapeutic situation, I'm just helping them find themselves. That's the reclaiming. So my title of my practice was really, in a way, hopefully telling people that they didn't have to go find something else or change. All they mostly had to do is turn into themselves and find themselves and go from there. And interestingly enough, it was, what year was it? It was 1984. There was an unusual group of old Reichians who would meet once in a while, and there was sometimes a guest. And one night I was there, the guest was Eva Reich, the daughter of Wilhelm Reich, the eldest daughter, who was following in his footprints and was in San Francisco on her way to Japan, starting her 8th tour around the world, giving the teachings, her form of Reichian therapy, which was mostly focused with children, babies, birthing, things like that. And she needed a ride to the airport after the meeting. And for some reason, I mean, I'm a single mother, I had a babysitter, my home was there and the airport was there, and it was a cold, rainy night, but I offered to give her a ride. And we got stuck in traffic.
Oh.
And I mean, she made her plane, but we were there for a long time, and we were talking and talking and talking. And finally, she said, "Well, my dear, what do you do?" And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. I said, "Well, I know that your father wouldn't like it, but I'm, certified in Reichian therapy. We call it that here on the West Coast." And I said, "But over the years, another field of awareness or practice has joined my therapeutic practice, and it's probably something you don't know about. It's the work of sensory awareness, the work of Elsa Gindler." And then I really gritted my teeth, expecting her to scream at me or something. And what she said was, "Oh, my father would be so glad."
Oh.
And I kept on driving. And she told me how her mother had studied with Gindler, their best friend, Claire Fennikel, and Otto Fennikel studied with Gindler, this woman who almost nobody knows about. And she remembered as a child going on picnics and hikes in the mountains, the parents, the friends, and everything. And Wilhelm Reich would over and over say, "Now tell me, what is that you do?" He could barely believe what. You pay attention to your breath, you pay attention to your standing. And he was he was curious. He never met Gindler. He never, well, I don't know what else, but he never met Gindler. But Claire Fennikel brought her husband, Otto, who was Reich's best friend, to Gindler's class once. And Otto Fennikel felt his migraines go away. I think that first class I read healed his migraines, so he kept on going. And he would have Claire present some to his colleagues, his seminars that he was giving. But Wilhelm never did. And that's interesting because when I think it was the Paris EABP, where I went to a talk, and the person who was talking said that Wilhelm Reich had studied with Elsa Gindler. And I knew that was wrong. I just knew that was wrong. I also knew that I'm not going to stand up and go against this very loved speaker in the European Association of Body Psychotherapy. So I kept my mouth shut, but when I went home, I contacted this person, and a very alive email conversation came with a lot of people joining. And eventually somebody said, "Why don't you write about it?" And interestingly enough, everybody dropped off except two people. One was the person, and the other person was, another therapist in Europe. And out of our conversation, back and forth, came the article that is in the journal. This very journal here. In what year was it? It was, can I remember what year it was? The journal. I don't remember, but I was so.
If you remember the title, we could probably Google it.
Well, it was Elsa Gindler in her influence on Wilhelm Reich. I think it was in 2009 because the conference was in 2008.
Okay.
And we went back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
And I was honored, really honored to be even a third of a name of an article in the journal,
Yeah.
because it's such a fine journal. But that was really, really striking. And another interesting thing about this whole picture in doing more research, it was how in the world did this work of this simple woman, Elsa Gindler, come to this not so simple man, Wilhelm Reich. And Ulf, one of the co-authors in that article, said, I think he said he found out that Gindler's studio and Reich's office were on the same street in Berlin for a while. They never met, but they were, passing in the wind or something. And in preparing for another talk that I gave just last year for the Reich Museum, I found an article that a sensory awareness colleague of mine did with Claire Fenikel in 1978. And in that article, she tells about them all, being in Norway, trying to keep away from the Nazis. And by this time, Annie Reich and Wilhelm Reich had separated, and Wilhelm was with Elsa Lindenberg, who was probably the great love of his life.
Yeah.
And she was a dancer. Mm-hmm. She had studied with Gindler. and when they were in Norway, Elsa Gindler had sent Elsa Lindenberg to study with Claire Fenikel. And here in Norway, so Claire was, Elsa was doing that. And Claire said that everybody noticed when Wilhelm Reich's therapeutic practice, you might say, changed. He had people wear looser clothing. Mm-hmm. And the interviewer said, why? And Claire said, well, so they could move more easily and be more free in breathing. So we think that that's really when, it came together.
Yeah. It's fascinating for me to understand the foundation of how just a small band of people with faith and belief can go forward, and somehow they all interact and intersect. You met so many people in your path to learn and to understand. You started, as you said, from your own background, and then coming into wanting to learn more to help others coming from their own background. Mm-hmm. And there's so much transition and shifting going on now with all the neurosciences coming in. Have you seen shifts and changes in some of more of sort of the Reichian approach with the addition of the neuroscience, with the vagus nerve coming in? I know you've studied with Peter Levine in the somatic experiencing, and you're looking at the biodynamic work, which is also sort of science, some science driven in terms of body. How do you see this newer information, not necessarily brand new, but newer, coming into the platforms that, sort of are the foundation?
Very, very strongly and very interesting how it's changing it. For some people, it's changing it. For some people, it's just expanding. But I can give you an example. I knew Peter, long before SE.
Yeah.
And he had studied, I studied Reich. He was in the year before me studying with the same person. And we had met, and he had an orgone accumulator thing where he lived. And at one point he wanted to, he got a group of people together to sort of work out some of his theories, some of his practices. I had been in therapy with him a little while before. And at one point he was even using masks for the client to be masked, which I hated.
Yeah.
But that was, yeah. But anyway, there was this group of people, and all of them were bioenergetic therapists. Mm-hmm. Some of them were colleagues of mine. Well, one of them at CIIS, and we all met once a month for a weekend. And and after several months, I had to admit to the group that I think I was coming for lunch, and for the social ability, because I wasn't learning anything because that was how I worked. And I felt stupid and admitting that, but there was nothing new to this. And Peter didn't take it as a great offense and kicked me out, luckily. And one day Peter said, I have to say that my whole life and work changed after I took a one-day workshop with a woman named Charlotte. What was her name? Silver? Something. And I went, oh my gosh, now I know. Of course. And I corrected the name, and every now and then Peter, when he gives a talk, he does acknowledge Charlotte and say, that one day, and he wrote in the USAP journal, the memorial for Charlotte that I was honored to co-edit with Jacqueline Carlton. He wrote and he said, a friend of his just said, hey, let's go to this workshop. It was in San Francisco. And he said, it was, I stood up, I sat down, big deal. It was a boring day. Like, what's all of this about? And he said when he walked out that day, everything was different. The colors of the flowers were different.
Wow.
And that one day of doing what? Nothing special really affected him. Mm. And it's in there. And I really think that that's a very important basis for SE. And that's why it is so powerful. It's that, and Charlotte, the work of sensory awareness, that was the first experiential workshop ever given at Esalen. It was all a think tank until one day Alan Watts, whom everybody probably knows about, got a phone call. And the person on the phone said, I just met a lady who does what you talk about. And to Alan Watts's credit, he didn't take that as an insult, which he could have, but he started studying with Charlotte.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they started doing workshops together. And he introduced her to Esalen. And in 1963, she gave the first experiential workshop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And you've asked me, I think you asked me, what do I think of now? What's happening now with all the new changes?
Yeah.
I'm worried about some new changes, but it isn't the vagus nerve or the neuroscience. It's the computers and the phones and all the electronics and all the devices that we're going to. And I think that is really destroying a lot of us. I haven't answered it yet, but just this week I got an email from someone who lives on the East Coast. He wants to do Reichian therapy and he can do it over the telephone. Wow. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. I was at the beginning of COVID, before COVID hit, I was working with a wonderful Jungian dream analysis Reichian therapist, sand train therapy, hands-on touching, containment. I mean, she was talk about getting my wow to me deeply. And then COVID hit. And all of a sudden it was going to be on a telephone. And I'm like, I can't do this work on a phone. I personally need the contact to touch the deepness in me. So I hear what you're saying. Perhaps with a cognitive behavioral approach where you're only working on a thought, you can talk about a thought and analyze a thought and be a thought. But the subconscious is what's holding our patterning. And I don't know if you can reach the subconscious with a thought. That's where EMDR came in. That's where, EFT came in. That's where some of the other products came in to how do you get into the amygdala where, sensations are stored? How do you get into the containment of the body, the tightness of the body where the clenching is stored? So the telehealth is definitely an interesting approach. I think for body psychotherapists. I know some people in Israel who feel that they're having success with it. But I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. with it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there something special you're working on right now? I know you're out on this beautiful island. I can see the water in the background. Are you currently involved in a project today?
I am doing a lot of work, not on the telephone, but on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise and maybe horror, because I'm not good with computers or things like that, as I think you know already, it amazingly works.
Uh-huh.
I mean, the Sensory Awareness Foundation offers a session every Saturday morning, and it's, people from all over the world. And that's the wonderful thing about it. My students from Japan join, and people from Europe join, and you wouldn't be able to join. You gave an in-person workshop, and all those people wouldn't be able to come. So that's the wondrousness about it. Wow, how in the world? And then I must say, the first time I had to do a big talk on Zoom, it was a keynote for so another big part of my work is pre and perinatal therapy, the program that I left to do the somatic psychology program, luckily for all of us. And so I wanted to, when I work with people about, prenatal and neonatal work, it's mostly about touch and eye contact and prosody, all of these things that have to do with neuroscience. I mean, Stephen Porges probably popularized the word prosody, that most people didn't understand what it was. But how am I going to do this on Zoom? And I did it as best as I could, and I thought, oh, but interestingly enough, I watched it. Maybe I watched my own presentation just to see if it was terrible or not. Some months later, and there I was talking about eye contact and how important it was. And then, without any warning, I turned, which is what I'm teaching babies not to do. What happened when I did that to you?
I was like, wait, where'd you go? You left me. And very quick, she left. Yeah. I felt the leaving.
Yeah. And so did I. I mean, I left me there, and I thought, well, hey, it does work. It may not be the greatest thing in the world. I still haven't figured out how to help people really experience the different qualities of touch. But it's working better than I thought, and probably as best as possible. And I think we're going to be doing a lot of it for a long time.
I have found Zoom to be so amazing as a writer, doing writing workshops, because like you said, I can have people coming from everywhere, and I can bring in movement and music and, meditation, and I can bring everything in. And because we're taking it to the page, it can become a personal feeling and checking in with the sensory awareness and then moving it outward and onto page. So I definitely see the power of Zoom and connection. But like you said, the hands-on touch part, I've tried things like holding a pillow versus holding a stuffed animal versus holding sandpaper, just to get a sense of textural difference. But it's not the same thing as, and then you do pressure difference. So I think it challenges us to be more creative. And how do we bring that sense of isolation because of computer into connection? And maybe that's a strong point for it, because maybe our clients are feeling that isolation and disconnection. And if we can bring it to life through technology, then maybe they can transfer it into real life. Don't know, just guessing.
Yeah, that would take a lot. That would be wonderful. And I think people like you who are aware of that will do it. A lot of people, of course, won't. And I have to say, one of my concerns, did you ask about that?
As a matter of
just
fact,
bringing
yes,
it up?
I was going to ask you, what do you think about the future of all the somatic psychotherapies and the body psychotherapies? I mean, so this fits in perfectly. Sort of, where do you see the future going? And
Well, number one, of course, I think it's essential. I could not do sit and talk therapy, even though sometimes we sit and talk, but there's always that possibility. And I can remind the person going into him or herself on phone or face to face. But what I have just become aware of is interesting and concerning. Let's see, this is February. Last October, I did my first in-person workshop up here in Canada for Hollyhock. And I've done so many different workshops online for the, 2-3 years beforehand. And here we were, real people in a real, sitting in the same room. And, it was different. It was just what was the title of the workshop? Anyway, it was a sensory awareness workshop, just simple sensing, coming more into ourselves. And the people were, what can I say? It almost felt brittle. And it felt that there I was sitting with them, and things were not going in, like they were going and maybe falling to the floor. People felt more fragile. Mm-hmm. And for the first couple of days, some of them, because I just allow freedom, you can do whatever you want. I may suggest something and you don't have to do it. Stay with your own instinct. Several of them were lying down and taking naps. Wow. And I think from the isolations, from the computers, what would Reich say about all of this? All of these energies, keep the orgone accumulator away from television sets, from computers, from all of that stuff. And it was interesting. And it felt like I said the first time, people, felt they needed a rest and they were wrapped up in blankets. I said, this feels like nursery school, so have a nice nap. And one of the men lifted his head and said, could we have some milk? Which of course we didn't do, but it was that youngness against the matureness of computers and things. And it took a couple of days, and that brittleness is not the right word. Maybe defense got softened. And then it was more like humanity schmoozing together. But it took some while, which I had never experienced before. And I really do think that it was not so much the isolation, but the use of so many of these devices in different ways. Yeah. So that's what I'm concerned about. Yeah. And the guy who thinks he can have Reichian therapy on the telephone, I have to, spend some time composing that email to.
It's going to be a challenge as we go forward.
It is.
I know that there are some political powers happening in the United States with somatic psychology, psychotherapy, and it's going to be up to newcomers to draw on the strengths of our founders to say, wait, this is essential. You can't do therapy in your head. You have to do therapy, within the entire body.
In your whole being.
Yeah.
One of my campaigns, and I must mention, is that use of that body. At CIIS for 25 years, I would start every class, no matter what I was teaching, with introducing my students to my biggest prejudice. And that is that body work is what I have done to my car.
I love this.
And I don't do body work because it's got to be the whole person, no matter what. And that's an important thing, because so many people, body work is such a nice term. It's easy to say and all of that. And it is so important, even just the saying, and I've been campaigning this for forever.
So would it be, in fact, would it be essence work, being work? What would be a catchphrase that you think would capture it more without the cumbrance of being mind, body, spirit? Because I think mind, body, spirit is too encumbered. What would be a phrase that would capture all of that?
I agree with you. That is cumbersome. Well, hallelujah for the term somatics. Thank heavens we can use that. But the funny thing is, and I just got, I know that the handbook for body psychotherapy, is that what it is? The one that was published in Germany, in German
Heller's
first.
work?
No. This is the big handbook that two men, what are their names? That's where my aged memory is going. Anyway, it's being republished, and it was some years after it was published in English, and the title was a little bit expanded. Handbook of Body Psychotherapy and Somatic Psychology, I think was the title for the book in English. And I thought, whoa, neat. At least they extended that. And then in looking at the book, I think it was at the end, they said something, or maybe it was at the beginning. Somebody said, we have enhanced the title in English because some people, it's clear to us that some people do not like to use the term body psychotherapy. And then in parentheses, they mentioned me as one of the people who's complained so much. And I thought, oh, I am full-fledged a curmudgeon. And I've been complaining about this for years, and somebody's really heard. And I think that's important, not to narrow it down to just body. It isn't. It is all of it. The organism, maybe. Yeah. But somatic. The somatic aspect of it, which, thanks to Thomas Hanna, does bring it together. Even though soma means body, and we all know that, it still brings it out of just body work.
Well, I think I'm on a mission now to find a phrase.
Great, wonderful. I'd love to help you.
Oh, good. I would love to do some brainstorming, figure this out. What is the way to capture in a phrase? Because people need a phrase. They need to make it a way of that they can say it, that the general public will get it. When you say soma, people start thinking, oh, it's in my head, I'm, whatever. There's a connotation with that.
Right.
So, this is exciting. Well, this has just been an absolute delight to spend 45 minutes hanging out, learning from you. In terms of you going forward from today, are you looking at any more books, any more seminars, workshops? Do you have more creativity that you're wanting to express, or are you kind of in an oscillatory flow of just sort of being?
Well, any more books? I've never written a book. I'm not, when you said you're on a mission now, I thought, great, Nancy, you're a word person. I'm not. I'm not a word person. I'll help you as much as I can. If I can. And at being 84, I barely remember some of the words now, what to say. So do I see myself? Well, I'm going back to in-person workshops. I must say something else too. So this summer, for the first time in 2 or 3 years, I offered a Tai Chi workshop here, and the people couldn't even learn that as quickly as they did in the past, because we didn't finish the whole form in a week, which we always did before. So I really think sitting in front of these devices has affected us in many ways that we don't even know about yet.
It's definitely limited our attention spans. Everything is faster. The bleeps are faster. I'll have 4,000 hits on a Facebook teaser, but only 1,000 people will go to the website to read the actual article.
Oh, interesting.
So there's interest in the information, and there's conversation about short, but where it's longer, sustained focus. Yeah. Because
you wanted that paragraph.
Yeah.
So quite frankly, I mean, I'm working mostly with adults, and my focus, you might say, even is mostly to the children. So I'm doing a lot of neonatal, prenatal, even preconception work, just helping women, parents, mothers and fathers, and all sorts of people become aware of the possibility. There was just a baby born here on the island, and the father was saying, so the baby has a 4-year-old elder sibling, And the father was saying that when his daughter, 4-year-old daughter, talks, the baby turns and really responds to her. And I say, yeah, she was at the level, at his hearing level, that the baby in the womb could hear the mother and the father, but that was farther away. That sibling was right there at his ear level. So yes. So to just help people become more aware of that. And it's sort of like going back as far back as possible to the beginning to help this world, humanity, try to become more human again.
Yeah.
Less robots, fewer robots, and more humanity.
Yeah. That's a wonderful gift you're bringing. Yeah. A wonderful gift.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really essential.
Yeah.
We as a human race, we could use some resources, and we've got them. Yeah. They're right here. We just need to sink into them. The earth, gravity, our breath, touch.
And finding the safe place and the safe person to feel you could be vulnerable to sink in. It's hard to sink in alone in a chair. It's much easier in a relationship with someone who emanates the energy that you do, to feel like, I can sink in with this person.
Yeah. And it is also important. It's hard to do it by yourself, but so many of us are alone. It is important to be able to do that and sinking into it and feel I'm still safe.
Yeah.
Feeling my back as well as my front.
Yeah.
And my sides, all of it, the air around me. There are the trees. Breath.
You're teaching me right now. Thank you. I love this. This is an exercise I can practice. What a beautiful nugget for me to walk away with. Just in a matter of minutes, you've given me an exercise. Right. Yes. Yeah, I hope you keep teaching more. Keep sharing everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much.